Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Perpetual Chess Adult Improver Pod. We're actually welcoming back a return Adult Improver guest, friend of the pod, very insightful, excited to chat with him in a minute. But first, as always, wanted to thank Patreon subs for helping to sustain Perpetual Chess and becoming part of the community. Recent subs include WIM Natasha Regan. Thank you, Natasha. Joe Delator, Jason Sands, Rick, Brad Langer, and Kevin G. And our guest this week is an active part of the chess community. So I interviewed him on episode 247 back in 2021. That was as the pandemic was starting to recede. And he had a fascinating story, which I will I will briefly retell his story for those of you who didn't hear that interview in a minute. But first, just to give you a briefer intro, he has a PhD in applied math, and he's working at a computational fluid dynamics company, but manages to find a lot of time for chess. He's active as a volunteer for Lichess. He's known as Knows All there, active in the ChessDojo community. And he's someone I admire because he's had a slow and steady trek up the chess ladder, again, as we'll get into in more detail in a minute, but basically started chess around 2013 and very slowly has made his way to knocking on the door of 2000 USCF. He's a chess bibliophile as well, so always full of recommendations in that regard. And without further ado, I will welcome back to the program Dr. Michael Franco. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. It'll be good to catch up. So, Michael, if you don't mind, I took some notes on our first interview. I thought maybe I would just do a quick chess bio of what we discussed last time, and you can fact check me as I go through it for listeners who might not have heard that interview.
Sure.
Okay. So here is my one paragraph summary of episode 247, which again, I do recommend that listeners check out in full. So Michael discovered chess in 2013 while fighting leukemia. He was quarantined at that time, so was looking for an intellectually engaging hobby, and that's how he got into chess. He became a big Magnus fan during Magnus's first World Championship match against Viswanathan Anand in 2013. Started to find various chess YouTube channels. Started out with around an 1100 Lichess rating. And just as I said, slowly and steadily has climbed. His primary emphasis has been, to his credit, on playing 15-10 rapid games and reviewing those games assiduously, isolating what type of mistakes he's making, working to correct them. But as I mentioned, he's also, read tons of chess books and happy to share some introductions about that. One other thing we talked about in our prior interview, he was just getting his feet wet in OTB chess. He had played 2 tournaments, and we had talked about the difficulties in transitioning from being a pretty good online player. If memory serves, Michael was already over 2000 Lichess at that time, but struggling to translate it to OTB, which I know is something a lot of people struggled with. And in subsequent times, Michael not only has gotten better at chess, but his USCF rating is starting to reflect that, as he is now at 1981 and briefly crossed 2000 in his most recent tournament. And I think that covers the main things people need to know. So I'll stop babbling now. Michael, how'd I do?
That was fantastic, actually. I feel like my whole world has been seen.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, what's up now? ChatGPT. I can summarize things as well.
Yep.
So Michael, again, I'm impressed with your longevity. I'm impressed with your persistence. As we record this here on January 13th, 2025, what is a typical chess day for you like now?
Yeah, I mean, there's now kind of 2 phases for me. There's the phase where I'm involved in an OTB event. Either I'm literally playing, or I'm in the lead up to it, or I'm in the cool down from it. And then there's the kind of default state of being. And so I would say that my average chess day is going to be in that default state of being, where I am not really looking at openings basically at all. I'm going through 1 or 2 books that I think are interesting, usually a tactics book and or calculation book, alongside some sort of strategy book. So right now, for instance, I'm going through TurboCharge Your Tactics by, I won't be able to say his name. I think it's Oleksienko and Grabinski, although maybe someone should fact check me there. And then also going through, in terms of strategy, I'm going through Woodpecker too, the classic one by Smith. So yeah, basically an average day for me is I'm playing an occasional game, which would be a 15 plus 10, or I'm going through the books and I'm usually live streaming them in the ChessDojo. And if anyone kind of wants to join in, we'll join in. So that's usually the shtick. A lot of study and some playing.
Okay. And well, first of all, it's good that you've managed to stick with Rapid. A lot of people, as they continue to get stronger, as you have, start to gravitate towards Blitz. Has that been a temptation?
Unfortunately, I'm really horrible at Blitz, so it's been less of a temptation because whenever I play a Blitz game, I'm like, oh, this opening is useless. I can't use this to help my actual chess. And, I'll blunder in time control, time pressure when I have like 30 seconds, which is to say most of the game when you're 3+0.
Right.
So yeah, historically, I play 3+2 if I'm going to play Blitz, and I will still flag even in 3+2. So no, not usually a Blitz person.
Yeah, good for you. I mean, I'm pretty bad at Blitz too, but it doesn't stop that from being what I gravitate towards wanting to play. If I'm going to play a game, I just get a little restless playing. I can sit there for 5 hours if I go play a classical game, but if I'm playing online, I have trouble focusing on anything longer than 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Interesting. Yeah. The 15-10s for me are pretty good. The main issue, honestly, more than the game itself, is that the pool gets smaller as you get towards the top. So actually, I kind of stopped playing 15 plus 10s when I hit the 2,500 mark on Lichess because there's actually just not an active pool anymore. If you want to find rapid players that are above 2,500, then you're looking at the 10 plus 0 pools. And then at that point, I might as well just play Blitz.
Right.
So,
well, that's a good humble brag, at least. Like you just got too good, You can't
exactly.
can't find the opponents anymore.
There you go.
So I looked at your USCF history, and it's amazing because like I said, you were about 1,700 USCF, which I don't think fully reflected your strength at the time. We chatted in 2021, but you slow and steady. Again, you've gained a lot of points. But what surprised me is you didn't play a ton. Now I know you're a busy guy, so that I'm not judging. I'm just impressed that you're able to make the progress you did, going from about 1,800 to 1981 at the latest USCF in really 6 tournaments. So what was the experience of those tournaments like, Michael?
Yeah, it was really fun. I feel like I never really experienced what a lot of people said when they were playing after the pandemic, which is I'm constantly playing against like these underrated kids. I definitely played against a lot of kids, I will tell you that, but I kind of keep spreadsheets on like all my information and such. And so I kind of did also track these people as time went on. And only one of them really jumped like a bunch of points. They're definitely improving, but I feel like most of my opponents were, whatever rating they were, and then they jumped up a little bit. Yeah, the experience of going to OTB is very, very stressful for me. I feel like when I'm playing a 15 plus 10 game, I can get into it. I can cool down from it. I feel like I'm very focused during the process. And then I can analyze the game and be chill. And it takes, an hour or so to play a 15 plus 10 game. It takes me maybe 30 more minutes to analyze it. And it's just like a thing I have time to do. When I do an OTB event, I don't really like playing the ones where you can see your opponent weeks ahead of time. So I prefer playing these weekend events where it's a 5-rounder or a 7-rounder. But then the flip side of that is that I just absolutely get wrecked by the end of the week.
Yeah.
It's basically just like physically, mentally, emotionally draining by the end of it. And very often I'm taking a bye at some round in the middle of the tournament just because I just need some time and I can't keep up with the 2 rounds a day thing. So stamina is a huge issue for me, actually. But every single, like the game itself is just pure joy. Like when I'm actually in the game, I'm stressed, my heart rate is racing, and I'm like really enjoying it. So it's the two sides of the coin there.
Yeah, very relatable. As I was briefly saying to you, and as I've mentioned on recent pods, I also was playing a lot last year, stopped around June, and now I am playing in the U.S. Amateur Team East. So if anyone's playing or sees me there, please do give a shout. But I was hoping that would kind of spur me to sign up for more tournaments, and I'm still dragging. And I was talking to a friend, my friend FM Donny Ariel, whose YouTube channel you should all check out, by the way, about how he's pretending like he's going to make Grandmaster. Shout out to Johnny and to Donny, even though, he's a old washed FM who's not going to make it. Sorry, Donny, had to do it. So,
Yikes.
but I was talking to Donny because he couldn't believe how exhausting it was to play OTB. It's like he'd forgotten. And I was telling him that when I play one game, because when I do gravitate towards the weekly game setup, even if people can prep a little bit, but the next day I kind of feel like I'm hungover. Even though I don't I don't drink after the game or anything. But it's that same sort of feeling where I'm just a little groggy and very slow to get started. And so even just one classical game per week at night, really, I feel like slows me down, let alone those weekend grinders.
Yeah. No, I mean, really, I feel like a key to my success, you were talking about how I've gained a lot of rating kind of every single tournament. The main thing I can point to is like when I am just dead from a game where it was a 4.5 hour draw where I was on the worst side of it and like the person was just trying to punch me repeatedly. I'm just like, okay, I throw my hands up. That was it. I got to take a break and I'll just take a bye the next round. Shout out to a person I played in the Chicago Open who basically we played. I was in that exact same experience that I just described, where the first round of the day was brutal. Then the second round of the day, I'm playing this person. We ended up getting a very complicated, tense middle game, and I just didn't have any juice left in my tank, and I just decided to play bishop takes h7 and resign. You know what I mean? Like I was just like, this is equal, but I can't do it. I just literally can't do it. And afterwards, he said, why didn't you take a bye this round? And I had never even heard of taking a bye in the middle of the tournament. I thought you could only take a bye if it was a half-point bye, if you had set it up in the very beginning. So this was news to me, and I've used that ever since. Just like, oh yeah, if I can't do it, if I'm really dead, then I'll take a bye and just rest.
Yeah. And different tournaments have different rules about taking buys. I'm a staunch advocate for newer listeners of taking buys as much as you need. But some of them, as Michael said, especially towards the later rounds, you need to have committed before the tournament, which you can know you're not going to want to play 2 games in a given day. For some of the earlier rounds, you don't necessarily have to commit. Like the first couple rounds, you might be able to do it more ad hoc. But the other thing is a lot of tournaments, to what Michael experienced, like you might not be able to take a half-point buy, but you can take a 0-point buy.
Exactly. That's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
Yeah. Where you're not, you're at least not depriving someone of a game and you're not donking off rating points, So you say, okay, like it's not ideal that I'm going to get 0 points this round, but with the frame of mind I'm in, I probably would get 0 points anyway and feel bad about myself and lose rating on top of it. So you can at least, you can take a 0-point by, I believe, even without notice. And of course you don't want to just not show up for a round and then deprive someone of a game. So
right.
It's good that you made that change.
My approach to OTB very often is I want to play a game that I'll be happy to analyze afterwards. That's kind of the reason that I'm playing these games. And so if I know that I just don't have the effort, if I don't have the energy, and I'm not trying to win, prize money, I'm not trying to become a GM. I don't need to get like a norm, I don't need to play X number of rounds. So I can take a 0-point buy and just say, this is just to rest. And then honestly, maybe I'll have a little bit of energy to analyze or write down some thoughts of some of the previous rounds. But basically, rest and recover, come back, and then say, this game will be more interesting because I took that break for that one round. And yes, I am usually taking a 0-point round there.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to go. But more broadly, Michael, so you've obviously gotten used to OTB given your results, and you talked about your apprehension and the transition and even using weird AI tools to try to get used to the 3D board in our prior interview. So how long did it take you to feel pretty comfortable playing competitively, or at least from the navigation of the physical chess side of things?
Yeah, I think really that this tabletop simulator thing that you're describing.
That's what it was. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Maybe not AI, but more like virtual reality.
Sorry.
I did not ever play it in virtual reality. I just used it as a 3D kind of video game where you can kind of change your perspective. Having had hours playing chess on this, 3D board, if you will, and having a physical board kind of in my house to occasionally analyze. And at the time I was also at Berkeley for getting my PhD. And so occasionally I would go to the club there and I would play someone not capable of getting longer time control games against someone, but just playing an occasional game against someone. I didn't really struggle to see the board. I didn't really struggle to see like the diagonals being different or the knight kind of jumping to different squares in the same way that I think I hear other people describing. And I'm a coach now as well. And when I'm coaching students also, I feel like there is that big jump from I'm an online exclusive player, I play in my home, and then I go OTB and I'm going to play on this new set in this new world in this new 3D thing. And there is I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's like a comfort level with just kind of experiencing the board from a different perspective. Personally, it's never been a big issue. So I don't have any huge tips of how to get through that except for play in 3D.
Yeah, just practice. But now, I mean, we talked about sort of maybe the nerves associated with OTB, but you don't feel like you're going to play worse anymore because it's OTB. Okay.
No, definitely not. I'm playing my best chess when I'm 100% focused and I have the effort levels. But it's keeping up the effort levels is the hard part for me personally.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get into some recommendations. So you've definitely gained a couple 100 points in strength since we last talked. And I'd love to eventually hear about what resources have helped you with that. But since you're doing more coaching, why don't we start with stuff a little bit lower, because I know that you're doing, you're working with some lower rated students and also a lot of the volunteer work you do at ChessDojo. I'm sure you find yourself giving a lot of recommendations. So what are your top recommendations when you get the sort of generic chess questions?
Yeah, so I feel like the thing that everyone always hits, there's a point where they hit it, and it is, how do I know what to do in this middle game when I haven't studied this before? And I feel like the questions come, it's I don't know if you've heard of this term, but an XY problem. The XY problem is where someone asks a question, but it's not the actual question they should be asking. They're just like sort of in their own head took steps towards a solution, and then they're asking this tangentially unrelated question that if you know what's going on, then you know that that's not really the question they wanted to ask in the first place. So the question like, how do I get better at chess, is the actual question that they want to answer. But then they kind of in their own head got this one position and they were like, I didn't know what to do. So let me ask about this like specific question, a specific position. And I feel like as a coach and also as someone who's like active in the Discord community where you'll see someone post a position and be like, I had this in my game. I had no idea what was going on. What should I have done? The answer is almost always the same. And the answer is you need to find your worst place piece and you need to make it better. Whether or not that's moving the piece to a better square, identifying what that square should be, or setting up an attack based on, my queen is hitting G2, so maybe I should put my knight on F5, knight F4 because that hits G2, something like that. Or it would be, I need to make a pawn break because doing this pawn break activates the rook behind it or activates the knight in some way or chips away at the center. Or my opponent has this huge center and I need to break it down. Like you can shrink the problem into smaller and smaller cubby holes. And you do need to do that the higher up the ladder you go. But if you just kind of approach the position with this, what is my worst place piece? How do I make it better? You'll probably find a good plan. And by plan, it's usually like 1 to 2 moves, and that itself, you don't need to see to the end of the game. That in and of itself is going to be really good advice to improving.
Really well said. Yeah. And there's an aspect of it where it's like a confidence game sort of thing, where it's more important not to sort of get caught up in some sort of mental spiral about, I have no idea how to play this position, than it is what you actually do, because often when you're in that position, this is a little bit what my Chessable course is about. Often when you're in those positions, it's because it's not a critical moment. It's not fun to feel like I have no idea what to do. But if you don't screw up on that particular move, if you just make sure you at first do no harm, like the game will go on and eventually you'll feel like you have some sort of clue what to do. Things will clarify and the game will ultimately be decided by someone making some sort of pretty big mistake. But yeah, to your point about improving a piece, it's certainly, as long as you make sure you're not screwing up. I do think that that's a good rule of thumb. And obviously, that's one of Agard's famed 3 questions for what to do when you don't know what to do in a position, along with what are the weaknesses and what is my opponent intending. But I do agree, Michael, that at the lower level, I think improving your worst place piece is probably, because a lot of people say, well, I don't know how to identify the weaknesses,
Right.
And your opponent might have done some quiet thing too. So maybe you don't know what they're intending, but you always have a worst place piece. So that is sage advice. And what about resource recommendations? Is there anything you find recommending more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it depends very much on the level. So I've coached people that are going to be, let's say, 400 USCF, and I've coached people that are going to be 1600 USCF. So it's like very, very broad range. I would say the best bang for your buck. I know it's controversial on this podcast, but it's the same thing that I said last time. I do think that Silliman's Reassess Your Chess, if you are above, let's say, 1200 OTB, I think it's probably the best bang for your buck. And I feel like the simplicity of what I just said can then get broken down into so many different ways. And that book really approaches let's say 80% of all the different ways in which you can identify what your worst piece is based on his imbalance system, which you can or can't use, and then also like how to make them better. So in that sense, I do really like that book. If we're talking earlier books, as mentioned, you really want to make sure that you're focusing on getting a grip on the board, and you want to make sure that you're getting kind of that feel for what's loose, what's not loose, every single move. You want to get a feel for what is what is tactically dangerous and what is not tactically dangerous. And I feel like more than a specific resource, if you just approach your own games and every single game, you tell yourself, is this a critical moment because a lot of things are in tension with each other? Or is this just a moment where I can do a default improving move, like improving my worst place piece, developing a piece, controlling the center, like one of the default kind of things? You don't need necessarily a resource at the beginning. You need more a grit and determination to keep banging your head against that and to keep making sure that you're like, this isn't that critical. I just need to take my worst place piece and make it better. Don't overthink it. Just put the piece on the square. And the act of putting the pieces on the squares is something that beginners struggle with a lot more than I personally did, I feel, but also a lot more than I would have expected from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you also do want to be, because when I interviewed Grandmaster Fidel Corrales Jimenez, he called it happy moves, something I hadn't heard before, but basically where people are kind of have a tunnel vision where they're not necessarily attentive to what their opponent's doing. So I do just want to add the caveat. You always want to think actively about the move your opponent just made, because people do sometimes miss threats. But once you feel fairly confident that there's no direct threat, then I definitely echo your advice. So moving forward, so to your own work. So again, you've gone from you're knocking on the door. Oh, one thing I wanted to say about the rating thing in response, because so this is to what Michael had said about he felt like he's not necessarily experiencing all these underrated kids to the extent. The reason why, Michael, is because you're basically coming of chess age, of OTB age, when all the change has already happened. So you're basically getting better on hard mode. You just don't realize it. Like
I see.
Yeah. So the deflation is like, it's already sort of filtered through, I think. So kids always got better faster than adults, but they weren't like, there used to be, 20 years ago, some semblance of their ratings keeping up with it. They might lag by 100, 150 points, but there was a period, especially around the pandemic, where it might be 400, 500 points. And I do think that that's kind of filtered through the system. Ratings have deflated, all the people I used to lock horns with, all the master level players that used to be 2,500, if they're still active, they're 2,350, and the changes might be even wider as the K factor increases on a lower scale. But again, I feel like it's filtered through the system, so that's why I don't think you're experiencing it. But it is there. It's so what the amount you've improved. It's a testament to your work that you've done it, as Sam Shanklin said when he congratulated Rainier Castellanos, who I interviewed on Making GM. You've done it on hard mode already. So did want to throw that in. But anyway, to get back to my question. What have you done to gain a couple hundred points in the past few years?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing holding me back, as mentioned, was I just wasn't playing. So when I started, when I started playing OTB, it was 2022. And at that point, I was already 2300 Lichess rapid. Now, rapid is the like highest rating relative to like your skill. So 2300 blitz is a lot harder. 2300 classical is a lot harder. And 2300 bullet is also a lot harder than rapid. But it is still an internally valid system. And so I was already like pretty high. But my over the board rating in USCF was under 1700. So I knew that I had kind of already done a lot of work going through a lot of books during COVID. And I just needed to like actually get the games in and actually analyze my games. And then therefore, like I knew I would improve a little bit. So in that sense, I was, let's say 100, maybe 150 points lower rated. So I get 150 points free. Let's put it that way. So how did I improve then from, let's say 1850 to 2000 is a big question. And it's becoming harder and harder for me to kind of identify the specific things that are changing kind of like what I was versus what I am. And so previously, for instance, there were aha moments where I read one time in, this is again Axel Smith's Pump Up Your Rating. He said the phrase, when you have two of something and your opponent has one of something, so let's say rooks, trade off one of the rooks, because then you're the only one who can do rook things and your opponent cannot do rook things. And that one like sentence opened up my mind in a way that I was like, oh my gosh, like, of course, that's so obvious, right? If you have two knights and your knights are tripping over each other and your opponent has one knight, well, just take their knight and then you only have you're the only one who can do knight things. So you're the only one who can do these knight
I read that book. I don't remember that line. Is that like a more or less verbatim quote?
No, it's not
things?
verbatim.
Okay. Okay.
It's not verbatim, but it is definitely in there and it is like explicitly mentioned. And then he also says this doesn't apply to bishops, because if you have two bishops, you don't have two dark squared bishops that are doing the same thing and tripping over each other. You're going to have a light squared bishop and a dark squared bishop. So in that sense, they're different pieces. So you don't want to do that rule for bishops, right? But it's such like it's a phrase I've now, maybe not a phrase, it's a concept I've heard now in 3 or 4 contexts since seeing it the first time. And every single time I'm like, oh, there's that advice that I learned that one time and it like blew my mind and I like instantly applied it and I instantly saw that I got better. But since, let's say, getting to 1850 over the board, I don't know if there's like a specific like aha moment that I can point to, except for I need to fight harder to push through my ideas than I was doing before. And so I would very often play solidly and positionally sound moves when I needed to just say, my position's good enough that probably this thing that I can't quite calculate is going to be positionally desirable. It will work out. And so I just need to like fight harder to either calculate better in that position and make the move that I need to make, or I need to just say, what would be the most active move in this position? Let me find the candidate move that I feel like should be good, and then even consider that in the first place, rather than kind of doing as you said, a happy move, right? That just sort of makes my position very clean. So fighting harder at the board is something that I've definitely done. But yeah, I don't think I can point to a specific magic bullet anymore, like I could earlier, where there were a few
that's kind
just
of
like genuine
how
aha
it works.
moments.
How it works with chess. But the idea you said of fighting harder to make a move work, that's another concept that sort of has gained currency. The Shanklin rule, Agard and Shanklin call it. And actually, I remember him saying this way back when I interviewed him in like 2016. When you want to when you want to play a certain move and you're not sure if it works, and if you can't refute it, just play it without thinking for 20 minutes, because it's clear like you want to anyway. If you haven't found a direct reinforcement, and it's either been adapted or clarified or modified or whatever in subsequent years, where the sort of catchphrase that Sam uses is, what if I do it anyway? This idea, like, what if my opponent's trying to stop something, but what if I do it anyway? And the other thing that you talked about in our last interview that you were really struggling with was, you mentioned a sort of excessive risk aversion in terms of your style, and you were trying to actively work to play more aggressively, take more chances. Has that evolution continued?
The evolution has continued. It's interesting because I feel like just before the last time we had this interview in 2021, I feel like I had recognized this about myself for the first time. And it's funny because I analyze my games consistently. And you say, oh, but you've only played like X number of games. Every single game I've played, I've probably put in 2 to 3 times the number of hours analyzing it that I did actually playing it. So it's really like I pick apart who I am in these games because I only have time for a handful of these a year. So it's like every single time I have a game, I really do want to analyze it and get to the real truth about who I am. And so I had figured that out before our last interview. And I keep coming back to it over and over and time again, that's still the case. I'm done years and hours and hours and hours to try and like change, I guess, I don't know, my chess personality. But every single time I'm analyzing the game and I'm disappointed in my play, it's very often that same issue that I'm not burning it all down because I should. It should be the position to burn it all down. But there's just this fear, this like my hand just like refuses to make the move that I would be happy to make in a blitz game where no stakes are on the line. But when it's like a 3-hour game, I can't quite bring myself to play like what Shirov would play, where he would just like light the board on fire because you should be in this position. And instead, I'm still struggling with that. And it's something that I have improved on, but it's like a never ending struggle. So yes, work has happened. There are a few games I'm extremely proud of. Where that's exactly what I did. And I was just like, nope, we're going in, we're going all in, we're sacking the queen. Like it's gotta work. Let's just assume it works. But there's just like my whole body, just like the temperature rises and the like hands start shaking, you know what I mean? Like when I'm like ready to sack that piece or sack that queen. And it's something that I can't like, just push away.
Yeah, it's so absurd because it matters so little in the grand scheme of things, but it just feels so important at the time.
Yeah,
yeah. And how many hours a day? Like, so you mentioned all the work you're doing streaming with ChessDojo. How many hours do you think you're managing to get into chess, either like per day or per week?
Well, the best part about the dojo is that they actually do have this activity tracker, and I've been pretty religious about logging my time. And so I can actually tell you exactly.
Wow.
Since graduating to the 1900 cohort, which in the dojo system is a sort of normalized rating system across all the different ratings, this would have been, for me, I want to say maybe September of 2023. So we're talking a year and a half. Let's call it a year and a half. I've done 1,001 hours and 9 minutes.
Wow.
So an hour and a half.
That's a lot.
Is that an hour and a half per day? Or maybe it's 2 hours per day?
2 hours a day is what I came up with. But you're the one with the applied mathematics PhD. So
yeah, close to 2 hours a day. And this is going to be 2 hours of like real chess and not like, oh, I listened to Perpetual Chess and therefore I was much better.
Shots fired. I'm catching strays here. How dare you? What could be harder work than listening to Perpetual Chess? No, I'm just kidding.
So it's like that's me logging like the hours where I was like analyzing my openings carefully, where I was reviewing my games, where I was playing a classical game, where I was working through like a tough book, where I was going through Fischer games. I went through like 130 different Fischer games at one point and like annotated them all just for myself. And so like these types of activities, going through the tactics, and yeah, that's 1,001 hours of that. So it is close to 2 hours a day if you average it out. Obviously, it ends up being like 8 to 10 hours a day when you're in those weekend tournaments. So that does bump up my average compared to like, as I said, my default state. But it's it's not easy.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you live with a girlfriend or wife, is that right?
Wife, yep.
What does she think of these 2 hours a day?
Yeah, it doesn't end up feeling like 2 hours a day, but what'll end up happening is maybe I'll get in 45 minutes in the morning where I'm working through a book, or maybe I'll get in an hour at night kind of thing where I'm working on, analyzing a game, and I'll do it in spurts like that. And so, I'm cooking dinner when she wants me to, and we're working together to go shopping when we want to. We're going to the grocery store. We're doing all this stuff together. But yeah, occasionally I'm like, okay, can I have like, an hour to just kind of zone out, or can I have an hour to sort of work on this? So yeah, she's very, very accommodating.
Nice. That's great. And getting back to the work you did on annotating 100 of Fischer's games, like what did you learn from that experience? What struck you about Fischer?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting because I went through my 60 memorable games, I think actually before the last time we talked, or maybe just after, but let's say call it during COVID. And I went through them again, and I turned on the engine as well. So I looked at my own annotations, I looked at Fischer's annotations, and I looked at the engine. And I kind of like combined and synthesized everything. And he was extremely good when it came to playing the active move, which is why he's like an inspiration compared to my default chess.
Yeah.
He was very precise when you needed to kind of push forward and refute your opponent's bad play. And his comments were very like succinct and to the point about how like this is the moment when black has made one too many errors, and like this is the moment where you can't come back from. And he really did try and like refute his opponent every single game, every single move, which is really, really cool to see. The other thing is that when you analyze with the engine, the amount of defensive resources that were available to both him and his opponent is like astronomical. So he would say things like, at this point, it's completely over and I'm just winning. And the engine would highlight like two more moments where actually it just dips down to like within the drawing range, something like that.
Yeah.
And so it was very insightful also to recognize, like, first of all, you do not have to play like an engine to be as good as Fischer, which is going to be plenty good for me. Right. So, you can give yourself a little bit of slack when the engine points out something and then it ends up being like too complicated for you to figure out. That's totally fine. And then the other thing is also just like, don't ever give up. In the position when you're worse or in a position where you're winning, don't ever assume that the opponents don't have any resources. And likewise, don't ever assume that you have no more resources and the game's over. And it's that's another thing that I'm gotten better at, especially over the board. I won't call them swindles, but I have saved draws from positions where it felt like probably you're not capable of doing it. But I did save it. And a few times my opponents have as well. And so just like kind of appreciating when you analyze your own games and when you analyze Fischer games that like you don't have to give up ever is, I thought, really useful advice for me.
Yeah. The theory of infinite resistance, Jonathan Rowson called it in 7 Deadly Chess Sins, to cite another classic book. But yeah, Fischer, I mean, the clarity and his annotations, they're so light in 60 memorable games, but so incisive. But I also did notice the last time I went through it that even he was not infallible when you've got the almighty engine on, although he was certainly ahead of his time in terms of the accuracy of his analysis. And I know you've got some more book recommendations, or resource recommendations, we should say, too. And Michael and I, we have like a shared taste. I think that was why I couldn't resist when you offered to give an update, because you like Andres Toth, you like Daniel King, like we're on like the same wavelength. But you had some book recommendations in there that I was not familiar with. So let's hear one or two more.
Okay, so the book that I'm going through right now, I find very, very fascinating. It's TurboCharge Your Tactics, and it's all about finding candidate moves that you wouldn't expect. So as one example, there's one position where your bishop is pinned, and you're like, if I could just move this bishop out of the way, but I can't because I'm pinned, And so one might say, oh yeah, but you should what if I do it anyway, right? Let's do the same Shankland idea. What if I do it anyway, and what if I move my bishop out of the way? And every single bishop move just gets refuted. And so you're just like, if like the problem is I need to move the thing past the bishop, the pinnee, I guess you could call it, the target of the pin. If only I could move that out of the way, then my bishop wouldn't be pinned and everything would be great. And then you try that and every single move fails. And you're like, well, I guess I give up, right? Like how else can you get out of this pin to be up a piece and just save the game. And as it turns out, the correct answer is this unbelievable move where you put another piece in front of the same pinned thing. So you stack up even harder on this file where you're pinned. And then that's actually just working because tactically it works. And it's not even a hard calculation once you see that move, but just being able to come up with that candidate move is, it's great. And so it's really, really good practice to force yourself to consider new candidate moves that don't just jump out to you. And so I really like this book for that purposes. And it's actually a few moves in my games I can point to where I'm like, I don't know if I would have found that if I hadn't done this work. Yeah.
Before you go on to the next one, so what level would you say that book, like what minimum rating?
Yeah, very difficult. I would say it's got two kind of difficulties within the book. There's like the easier stuff and there's the harder stuff. And I would say the easier stuff is probably 1800 USCF or higher. And then the harder stuff is going to be maybe a little bit above my level, maybe 2100 USCF or higher. But it's an easier book than one of the authors worked on Perfect Your Chess, which is another like really complicated
classic book. Yeah.
This one is easier than that one, but it's like pushing in that direction. So it's not for the faint-hearted. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did look, and that one's relatively new, so I don't feel so bad that it wasn't totally on my radar. New from Quality Chess, so I'm sure it's good. Any other recent recommendations?
Yeah. I mean, a whole bunch. I went through Mastering Chess Strategy again. I technically had gone through about maybe a third of it a while ago when it was too hard for me. But I went through it again, and it's just a great example of Helston or Helstein. I'm not actually sure which one it is, but his mantra is just like hit you with a whole bunch of exercises that are all reasonably basic, but showcase the ideas like over and over and over again. And the exercise-driven approach in that book is really, really great. So highly recommend Mastering Chess Strategy. That one's an easier book as well. I would say you could probably get something out of it if you're 14 or 1500 over the board. I really liked for like the, I guess I would call it like a companion book for Mastering Chess Strategy would be this Bronsnick's Techniques of Positional Play book. Mm-hmm. That one, also talking about strategy, also talking about like focusing on like the different pieces and finding the preoms, right? These positional patterns that like just should pop out to you once you've seen them a million times. Like every single time there's a knight on G3, you should consider playing G6 to dominate the knight, and you should consider playing H3, I said. So it would be H5, H4 to go kick the knight around. That kind of concept works really well if you're doing Mastering Chess Strategy, because Mastering Chess Strategy is like infinite exercises and very exercise driven. And Techniques of Positional Play is like pedagogically taking you through these concepts one by one with no exercises. So if you combine the two of them, it covers basically everything you would ever need to know. And I've seen probably most of these already beforehand, but I thought the explanations were really clear, and the problem selection in both of those books was really, really good. Also an easier book, also probably 1500 could get a lot out of it too.
Okay. And you mentioned Woodpecker 2 earlier. What do you think of it?
It's too early for me to tell. I'm only through exercise, I think 120 out of 1,000 or so. I'm stuck a little bit because I like the book, but I'm doing it through one of the online ways of doing it. And I feel like I don't like when clearly the author has said that finding this concept is good enough, and then the online trainer asks you to find more or different variations that are like not the point. So I do like the book. I do like the explanations, and I do like the examples he's chosen. And I feel like probably I would have liked it better if I got in like a paperback or just set up the positions myself. Yeah.
Gotcha. And when you solve these puzzles, I mean, it sounds like you're doing a lot of solving. How much time are you spending per position?
Right. It depends on the book, definitely. But previously, I was much more, let's say during COVID, I had much more time. And so I was able to kind of sit with a position for 30 minutes and just like keep banging my head against it until something popped up. Now I feel like I don't really have that time, or if I do have that time, I'd rather kind of get through some of the books rather than say, no, eventually you're going to figure it out. And also some of that has to do with I'm playing more OTB. And my sin, if you want to, talking about the 7 deadly chess sins, is I spend too much time and I focus too much on positions where I don't need to focus. And so I don't need to get more experience thinking deeply for 30 plus minutes. I do need to get more experience trying to find and push through a problem as quickly as I can and really force that like intensity of like the clock is on me. So, everything being said then, I like to do, if it's an easier book, for instance, like Mastering Chess Strategy, where it's all about volume and it's all about like you see it or you don't see it, I'll do somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. And if it's like a really hard book, like for instance, the TurboCharge tactics sometimes can get very difficult. I try and do it in 10 minutes. And then if I'm streaming, I'll be talking to other people as well. So maybe someone already got it in those 10 minutes and then we can kind of move on together. Or maybe I didn't get it, my friends didn't get it. And so then we'll kind of challenge ourselves now moving the pieces on the board to see if we can get it in the next like 5 to 10 minutes. And once it's clear that we're just spinning our wheels, I'll stop the timer. I'll say, all right, we're moving on. What's the solution? Let's just read the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a more practical approach as time becomes more scarce. And what about online resources? Are your favorites still the same as last time we chatted? Any new ones you've been getting into, like YouTube wise?
Yeah, let me actually see. So I'm a religious person online. So when I find someone that I really like, I will stick with them until the very end, kind of thing. So in terms of like people I'm constantly watching their videos for, usually I will also say that this is going to be 2 times speed, and usually it's going to be in the background while I'm doing other things. So this is not going to be like, oh, I'm sitting in front of the screen hyper-focused. I'm a big fan of Naroditsky, a big fan of Andras Toth, big fan of Daniel King, big fan of Chess Network, and big fan of Dr. Jan's chess clinic, who is, I don't think I mentioned him last time, but he's really good as well.
Yeah. Shout out to John. Yeah. Good taste, like I said. No notes. Excellent. And so you mentioned before we recorded that you've made this great push. You briefly crossed 2,000, but now you might need to take a break from OTB chess.
Yeah. So the circumstances have changed a little bit, and also like I mentioned earlier, like it's a little bit of a research capacity that we're working in my office, and that might be changing a little bit as well. So they're asking us to do more volume and more hours, and less maybe you can kind of play with this problem for a while. So I don't have the capabilities to go to these OTB events where it takes me like 1 to 2 weeks to kind of like really hardcore focus on my chess and kind of prepare some openings just for myself, just to like feel like, oh yeah, I remember like doing the stuff at 1.78 months ago, Right. And then afterwards analyzing the games where it takes me like 10 hours per game maybe, or 5 hours per game, depending on if it was an easy or hard one kind of thing. It's a huge time commitment in like big chunks where I feel like I'm not sure if I can do it to the same level that I did. So I'm not saying like, oh, this is the end for OTB, but I am going to take a back seat and going to focus a little bit more on, can I improve my blitz a little bit? Because right now, if you will, my ceiling has increased. And so I can play really good moves if you give me some time, but my floor is pretty atrocious because I'm blundering in blitz games left and right. It's really bad. So, if I can improve, let's say, the floor, I'm less likely to maybe have to spend as long calculating in an OTB event if I do go back to that. But also it would just help me feel like, okay, these blitz games that I'm playing are maybe useful for my chess and less a waste of time. Because right now, the blitz that I'm playing, it ends up being more of a waste of time than any possible benefit you could get from them by like checking the openings or like doing anything like that, just because my rating is like, let's say 200 points lower rated than you would expect it based on my other ratings. Yeah.
Gotcha. And when you mentioned that you don't like the sort of weekly games or monthly where there's some buildup and people can potentially prep for you, what is it that you don't like about them?
Well, for starters, I have a very thin repertoire, so I just play the same thing every time. And so far in these events, I have been prepped against a few times, and it's been no big deal. So it's like it happens, but they're spending, let's say, an hour prepping instead of a week prepping. And so it's really no big deal. I have played against some people that are like my friends in training games, and those games end up being less useful because we've looked at the openings too much, that we know too much about what we play. And so then it becomes more about like stockfish versus stockfish for a little bit until we get this weird position that we know is supposed to be 0.0. And it's like, this is relevant to anything I've ever like going to look at again. So I find it more like practically useful to just kind of play the pool, if you will, in an OTB event and just like, okay, whoever you get matched up with, you're going to just both know your stuff and we're going to see what happens. And I'm not like an opening expert here, but I do kind of analyze what I play with an engine, with kind of a few resources occasionally that I'll like check in on. And I'll like make sure that what I'm playing isn't like refuted. So even though I do have a thin repertoire, my main my opposition is not going to be able to like refute me over the board. Versus I do play some dodgy stuff in terms of like, objectively, I would suffer if someone was an engine. And so, because I'm not playing the Berlin every game, and I'm not playing like the Marshall every game kind of thing like that. I'm playing like sidelines in order to get, let's say, a game and less of a objective 0.0 evaluation. And so if I was playing someone who was prepping against me and the whole point is I'm going to suffer for a week, that doesn't seem very interesting to me. Lastly, I don't know of anyone who's playing 90 plus 30 in my city. So it's less, I know 60 delay 5 is there, but I do really like to play 90 plus 30 or longer. And that's another reason that I kind of haven't found that weekly.
Yeah, it's a big difference. You're in Austin, right? Austin, Texas?
Correct.
So how's the chess scene there generally?
It's pretty good, actually. It's better in Houston and Dallas. So if you need to like play a real big tournament, you probably will need to drive there. But driving 3 hours, I mean, I love driving. Driving is like another hobby of mine. So in that sense, it's no big deal. But within Austin, there's Austin Chess Club. There's Austin Grandmaster Academy, which is pretty cool. There's like 2 GMs that are kind of leading this I don't know what to call it except for a chess and grandmaster academy. It's exactly what it sounds like. And there's, if you're into like, let's say the 45 D5 games, which maybe I should get more into, as that might be another way to sort of get that OTB itch without having to do these weekend events. There's a lot of those events throughout Austin.
Wow, sounds pretty good. And possibly last question. Last time we talked, you were getting ready to go on like a trip to Mexico for like a chess bra event.
Yes.
How was it?
That was very entertaining, actually. Yeah. It was a one-off, actually. They didn't do a second one, although you could argue, I'm sure you remember hearing sort of vaguely happening this in 2022, a chess boxing event that happened in LA that made the news. Right. So that ended up kind of being like their second one. They ended up, because Aman was one of the main people fighting against Lawrence Trent, both fighting on the board and fighting. So they did a kind of a similar thing there in like the pre and post of that event. So, but yeah, it was fun. It was, let's say, chess during the day where you were focused, you were in classes, you were kind of sorted by rating into like, were you in the advanced class, the intermediate class, or the beginner class kind of thing. I ended up being one of the higher rated people there who was like a student, but they had multiple GMs. They had Mayo the Butcher, nice. I think is what his YouTube is. And then they had Lafang Kwa was also a teacher there. And then they had a few NMs as well, either in Canada or the US as well. And so they had like a real like chess kind of like training session during the days. And then at night, there was nothing scheduled except for people could drink, people could play some blitz chess, people could play some like random stuff, people could go out. There was like an EDM event that was happening nearby that I wasn't that interested in, but they're really into. And so, yeah, a few times, people stayed up until like 3 a.m. That wasn't really my vibe, but it was a thing that you could do. And then unfortunately, it was just around the time that COVID Delta was spreading. And so I ended up cutting it a day short because I thought maybe like 1 or 2 people had gotten diagnosed with COVID. And I was like, let's not risk it. And unfortunately, I did get home and then I tested positive for COVID. So it was a spreader in that sense. I know a couple people that did eventually get it a few days later. But Okay. I mean, thankfully we already had, at that point, we already had the vaccines and better medication to deal with it. I did not have a very serious effect at all.
Okay. Good to hear.
A lot of fun.
Well, congrats on the continued progress, Michael. Like I said, it's inspiring because it's not overnight success. You know, it's very slow and steady. And I like that you give back to the community in various ways. Any highlights or recommendations that you wanted to make that we haven't hit yet?
Yeah, I would say that, like, a lot of the time now that I'm coaching, I'm seeing questions that are like people aspiring to be too high, right? So it's not even so much that like I want my rating to be 1200 or I won't be happy in life, but like, oh, if only I was higher rated, then I would feel comfortable studying, you know, my 60 memorable games, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's a hobby, right? This is ultimately a hobby. None of us are going to be GMs because we are the adult improver term I don't love so much, so I'd like to joke about it and call it, we are all aspiring retirees, where we'll have unending time to be able to play chess. But in the meantime, you know, we're all living our lives. It's a hobby. And so I feel like the best thing that you can do is do the thing in chess that you enjoy the most. Because if you enjoy it, then you're going to learn something from it some way, one way or the other. And therefore, it's worth your time. And if it's maybe not like the correct book for your level, or maybe it's too simple of a tactic for your level, or maybe it's blitz and you shouldn't be playing blitz because shame on you kind of thing, it doesn't really ultimately matter as long as you're enjoying it. And I think people should do more of the things that they enjoy in this hobby. That's my big recommendation.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Well said. All right. Well, Michael, great to catch up. Great to hear your continued success. You knows all on Lichess if anyone wants to reach you. And it sounds like ChessDojo also highly recommended if you're ambitious. And it sounds like you're pretty easy to find there too, right?
Yeah. People can ping me on Discord. People can ping me on Lichess, and I'll probably get it within 24 hours. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, again, good to chat. I would say good luck in your future OTB pursuits, but those are going to be on the back burner. But good luck on the blitz grind. I can definitely relate to that. That's something I should consider as well, is just focusing. I always say, like, I want to make like, it's always been a weakness of mine, and I always feel like I want to take some time and like actively work on my blitz game, even at the expense of anything else. And I haven't set aside the time to do that, but it's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll see what I can accomplish there.
Yeah, maybe you'll inspire me. Okay, well, don't be a stranger. And thanks again for all of your recommendations and insights and inspiration.
Thanks for having me on.